The ice wind cut through Hana's torn clothes like a knife. She pulled her makeshift fur coat tighter around her shoulders and looked out across the endless white wasteland of Vorthak Prime. 3 months ago, she had been a respected human diplomat. Now she was just another piece of frozen meat waiting to die on this horrible world. Her shuttle had crashed during what was supposed to be a simple peace mission. The Vorthak Empire had agreed to meet with human representatives. They said they wanted to discuss trade agreements. Hana should have known it was a trap. The reptilian aliens had never shown any respect for humanity. To them, humans were weak and soft, good only for cleaning their ships and doing their boring paperwork. The crash had killed her pilot and damaged the emergency beacon. Hana crawled out of the wreckage with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small survival kit. The Vorthak garrison had found the crash site within hours. She watched from behind an ice ridge as their soldiers poked through the twisted metal. Commander Tyke, the local Vorthak leader, had examined her pilot's frozen body and laughed. His voice carried across the frozen ground like the hiss of a snake. "Let the human female freeze," he had said to his soldiers. "She cannot survive even one night in our glorious cold. When we find her body, we will send it back to Earth as a message." Humans do not belong among the stars, but Hana had survived that first night. And the second, and every night since then. She learned to dig shelters in the snow. She learned to find the tough ice plants that grew in sheltered valleys. She learned to make fire from the dried dung of the strange creatures that roamed this world. Most importantly, she learned not to fear the massive beasts that the Vorthak called Korvath. The first time she saw one, Hana thought she was dreaming. The creature was enormous, covered in thick brown fur that hung almost to the ground. It had curved tusks longer than her entire body and eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. It looked exactly like the mammoths from Earth's prehistory, except much larger. The Korvath had appeared at her shelter during a terrible blizzard on her 10th day alone. Hana pressed herself against the back wall of her ice cave, certain that the beast would crush her. Instead, it had simply looked at her with those deep, intelligent eyes. Then it had turned around and used its massive body to block the cave entrance, protecting her from the storm. When the blizzard passed, the Korvath had walked away without harming her. After that, Hana began to see them everywhere. They traveled, in small groups across the frozen plains, searching for food. The Vorthak hunted them sometimes, but only the young or sick ones. Even the cold-blooded reptiles respected the power of a full-grown Korvath. Hana discovered something strange about these creatures. They seemed to understand her in ways that made no sense. When she spoke to them, they would tilt their massive heads and listen. When she was hungry, they would lead her to places where ice plants grew thick. When she was cold, they would share their body heat. It started with small things. She would think about needing water, and a Korvath would appear to guide her to a hidden spring. She would wish for warmer shelter, and the creatures would help her dig deeper into the ice. Soon, Hana realized that her thoughts and feelings were somehow reaching them. The connection grew stronger each day. She began to understand their simple communications. A low rumble meant danger. A soft whistle meant food nearby. A gentle touch of a trunk meant friendship. One day, a massive Korvath approached her shelter. This one was different from the others. It was larger, with scars across its hide that spoke of many battles. Its tusks were chipped and worn, but its eyes burned with fierce intelligence. The other Korvath around it showed respect, staying back, and waiting for its commands. Hana knew immediately that this was their leader. She stood slowly, keeping her hands visible. The great beast studied her for a long moment. Then it did something that amazed her. It lowered its huge head until it was level with hers and made a soft, questioning sound. "Hello?" Hana whispered. "I am Hana." The creature rumbled deep in its chest. Without really thinking about it, Hana reached out and touched its forehead. The contact sent warmth through her entire body. Images flashed through her mind. Vast herds of Korvath running across green plains, a world of forests and rivers that no longer existed. "Beck," she said suddenly, not knowing where the name came from. "Your name is Beck." The great Korvath's eyes widened. It made a sound that almost seemed like agreement. From that moment, Hana knew she had found something special. Not just survival, but partnership. Beck became her constant companion. The massive creature would appear each morning, ready to help her search for food or materials. Other Korvath began to gather around them, drawn by some invisible signal that only they could understand. The Vorthak soldiers sometimes spotted her during their patrols. They would point and laugh at the small human figure riding on the back of a Korvath. To them, it was just another sign of human weakness. They thought she had gone mad from the cold and was now playing with animals like a child. Commander Tyke received reports of the strange human who lived with the Korvath, but he was not worried. Let the soft human play with the beasts. When winter came in full force, both she and her animal friends would freeze. The problem would solve itself. But Hana was not just surviving anymore. She was learning. The Korvath were teaching her things about their world that the Vorthak had never bothered to discover. She learned about the deep caves where geothermal vents provided warmth. She learned about the migration patterns that led to the richest feeding grounds. Most importantly, she learned that the Korvath remembered. These creatures had lived on this world for thousands of years. They remembered when it was warm and green. They remembered the coming of the Vorthak and the slow transformation of their paradise into a frozen wasteland. They remembered and they waited. As her third month alone drew to an end, Hana realized that she was no longer the same person who had crashed on this world. The frightened diplomat was gone. In her place stood someone harder, someone who understood that survival was just the beginning. The real test was still coming. Commander Tyke stood on the observation deck of his fortress and watched his ships prepare for war. Hundreds of Vorthak vessels filled the sky above Vorthak Prime. Battle cruisers, troop transports, and fighter craft moved in perfect formation, like a deadly dance. Soon, they would carry death to the weak humans who dared to exist in Vorthak space. The reptilian commander's cold blood warmed with excitement. For too long, the Vorthak Empire had tolerated the presence of these soft mammals. Humans were useful as servants and workers, but they had grown too bold. They wanted treaties and trade agreements as if they were equals. It was time to remind them of their proper place. General Donghae arrives within the hour, reported his aide, a young Vorthak officer with bright green scales. He brings news from the High Council. Tyke nodded. General Donghae was the Empire's greatest military leader. His presence meant this operation was more important than Tyke had realized. The humans would not just be defeated, they would be completely destroyed. "What news from our scouts?" Tyke asked. "No sign of human activity in this sector, sir. The rescue ships they sent for their diplomat never arrived. Perhaps they finally learned their lesson about entering our territory." Tyke laughed. A sound like breaking glass. Or perhaps they are simply too cowardly to risk more lives for one worthless female. Either way, the human problem will end soon. Far below the fortress, in a hidden valley carved by ancient rivers, Hana sat beside a small fire and watched Bayek's herd feed on ice moss. 3 months of living with the Korvath had taught her many things. She could read their body language, like a book. She could sense their moods and needs almost before they did. Most importantly, she had learned that these creatures were far more than simple animals. The herd had grown since she first met Bayek. What started as a dozen creatures had become nearly 200. They came from all across the frozen continent, drawn by something Hana could feel but not fully understand. It was like a song in her mind, growing stronger each day. Beck approached her fire and made a low, worried sound. Hana looked up into his ancient eyes and saw concern there. She reached out and touched his trunk, letting her mind connect with his. Images flashed through her thoughts, ships in the sky, soldiers with weapons, the smell of fear and violence on the wind. Beck was trying to warn her about something. "I know," she whispered. "I can feel it too." The emergency beacon in her survival kit had been broken for weeks, but yesterday she had finally managed to repair it. The signal was weak, but it was broadcasting. If any human ships were in the area, they would hear it. She hoped someone would come. She also feared what would happen if they did. The Vorthak fortress was built for war. Its walls were 20 meters thick and covered with energy shields. Its weapons could destroy a city. Any human rescue mission would be flying into a trap. But Hana had discovered something during her months in the wilderness. Something the Vorthak had never bothered to learn about their own world. She stood and walked to where Beck waited. The massive creature lowered his head, and she climbed onto his neck, settling into the hollow between his shoulders that had become her riding spot. Together, they climbed to the ridge that overlooked the valley. From here, Hana could see the true size of Beck's herd. The Korvath stretched across the valley floor like a brown sea. Some were huge adults with tusks longer than trees. Others were young ones still learning to use their trunks. All of them looked to Beck for leadership. But it was more than just one herd now. Through her connection with Bayek, Hana could sense other groups moving across the continent. Hundreds more Korvath were traveling toward this valley, called by the same mysterious force that had brought these creatures together. The Vorthak saw the Korvath as just large animals, dangerous if cornered but stupid and easily controlled. They were wrong. These creatures had intelligence, memory, and purpose. They were waiting for something, or someone. A sound from the sky made Hana look up. 3 ships were breaking through, the clouds moving fast and low to avoid the fortress sensors. They were human ships, small and fast. Rescue vessels. Her heart jumped with hope and fear. They had come for her, but they had no idea what they were flying into. The lead ship was already changing course, following her beacon signal toward the valley. Hana grabbed the emergency communicator from her pack and activated it. Human ships, this is Diplomat Hana. Do not approach the valley. Repeat, do not approach. The area is surrounded by hostile forces. The radio crackled to life. Hana, this is Captain Minho of the Terran vessel Resilience. We are here to get you out. What is your status? Captain, you need to leave this system immediately. The Vorthak have assembled a massive fleet here. This is not a rescue mission anymore. This is a trap. There was silence on the radio for a moment. Then Captain Minho's voice came back, grim and determined. Hana, we did not come all this way to leave empty-handed. Can you reach a safe extraction point? Hana looked down at the herd surrounding her. Safe was not a word that applied to her situation anymore, but extraction was something else entirely. Captain, I have information that could save the entire Terran Federation. The Vorthak are not just planning to attack human colonies. They are preparing for total war. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon they have is gathering here. All the more reason to get you out quickly. Can you move to coordinates I'm sending you? Hana looked at the coordinates on her communicator. They were only 10 kilometers away, but those 10 kilometers were crawling with Vorthak patrols. Getting there alive would be nearly impossible. Getting there without being seen would be completely impossible, unless she had help. She looked down at Bayek, who was watching the human ships with interest. Around them, the entire herd had gone still as if waiting for orders. Captain, I need you to trust me. I can reach your extraction point, but not in the way you expect. When you see me coming, do not be afraid. I am bringing friends. What kind of friends, Hana? She smiled for the first time in months. The kind that have been waiting 3 months for a chance to fight back. Above them, the Vorthak fortress came alive with activity. Alarms began to sound as the fortress sensors finally detected the human ships. Fighter craft launched from hidden bays, streaking toward the small rescue vessels like angry insects. The battle for Vorthak Prime was about to begin. But this time, the Vorthak would face an enemy they had never imagined. An enemy that had been living under their noses all along, waiting for the right moment to strike. Hana whispered something to Beck, and the great creature trumpeted a call that echoed across the valley. Every Korvath raised their heads and answered. The sound was like thunder, like an earthquake, like the voice of the planet itself waking up after a long sleep. The war had started, and the Vorthak had no idea what was coming for them. Deep in the caves beneath the ice, Hana made a discovery that changed everything she thought she knew about Vorthak Prime. The cave walls were covered with pictures, not scratches or random marks, but detailed drawings that told a story. Beck had led her here after the human ships arrived. guiding her through hidden passages that even the Vorthak had never found. The massive Korvath barely fit through some of the tunnels, but he seemed to know exactly where to go. The first pictures showed a green world. Trees reached toward a warm sun. Rivers flowed through valleys filled with flowers. Strange animals that looked nothing like the Korvath grazed in peaceful meadows. This was Vorthak Prime before the aliens came. Hana moved deeper into the cave, following the story painted on the stone. The next pictures showed ships falling from the sky. Creatures with scales and cold eyes emerged from the vessels. The green world began to change. Plants died. Rivers froze. The warm sun grew distant and weak, but the most shocking discovery came in the deepest chamber. The final pictures showed the Korvath, not as they were now, but as they had been long ago. The cave paintings revealed creatures that walked on two legs, used tools, and built cities. They had been the original inhabitants of this world. They had been intelligent. "You were people," Hana whispered, touching Beck's trunk. "You were all people." The great creature rumbled softly and showed her something that made her heart stop. In the center of the chamber stood a stone table. On it lay objects that could only be tools and weapons carved from bone and stone. They were simple but clearly made by intelligent hands. Beck led her to the far wall where the newest pictures waited. These showed the Korvath changing, becoming more like animals and less like people. The cold had done this to them. The Vorthak had not just taken their world. They had taken their civilization, but they had not taken their memory. As Hana stared at the pictures, she felt something shifting in her mind. The connection she shared with Beck deepened, becoming something far more complex than simple animal communication. Images flowed between them, not just feelings and simple thoughts, but actual memories. She saw the world as it had been. She felt the terror of the first Vorthak attacks. She experienced the slow, terrible transformation as the planet grew cold, and the Korvath were forced to change or die. They had chosen to survive, even if it meant becoming something less than what they were, but they had never forgotten. Generation after generation, they passed down the memory of what they had lost. They waited for someone who could understand, someone who could help them remember how to be more than just animals. "You
have been waiting for me," Hana said.
It was not a question. Beek's response came not in sounds but in pure thought. Yes. For someone who could bridge the gap between what we were and what we became. Someone who could help us remember how to fight. The sound of weapons fire echoed from outside the cave. The battle between the human rescue ships and the Vorthak forces had begun. Hana knew that Captain Minho and his small fleet could not win against the massive alien armada. They needed help. She was about to give them more help than they could possibly imagine. "How many of you are there?" she asked Beck. The answer came as a flood of images. Herds scattered across the entire continent. Thousands of Korvath, all connected by the same deep memory, all waiting for the same signal. They had been gathering for months, drawn by something they felt but could not name. Now Hana understood what had been calling them, her. The human ships were fast, but the Vorthak fighters were faster. Captain Minho's voice crackled over the radio as his vessel dodged energy blasts that lit up the sky like deadly fireworks. "Hana, we are taking heavy fire. Whatever you are planning now would be a good time. I am coming, Captain. Get your ships to the extraction point and wait for my signal." "What signal?" Hana smiled as she climbed onto Bayek's back. Around them, nearly 300 Korvath had gathered in the valley below the cave. More were arriving every hour, called by the same ancient pull that had brought the others. You will know it when you hear it. The journey to the extraction point took them directly past a Vorthak patrol base. Hana could have gone around, but she wanted the aliens to see her. She wanted them to report back to their commanders. She wanted them to laugh and point at the crazy human riding an animal. The Vorthak soldiers did exactly what she expected. They emerged from their bunkers to stare at the strange sight of a human leading a herd of Korvath across the frozen plain. Some raised their weapons, but their commander stopped them. "Let them pass," the officer said with amusement. "The human has finally lost her mind. She thinks the beast will protect her. When the cold kills them all, we will have one less problem to worry about." The soldiers laughed and returned to their shelters. They did not notice that the Korvath were not behaving like normal animals. The creatures moved with purpose and intelligence, their formation too organized, their movements too coordinated. They were not just following Beck. They were following a plan. At the extraction point, Captain Minho waited with his 3 ships. The Vorthak fighters had damaged his engines, but his vessel could still fly. His crew of 12 included some of the Federation's best pilots and soldiers. They had come expecting to rescue one diplomat. They were about to witness something that would change how humans thought about their place in the galaxy. "Contact approaching from the south," reported his sensor operator. "It looks like, Captain, you need to see this yourself." Minho looked through the ship's viewer and felt his jaw drop. A human figure rode on the back of a massive creature that looked like something from Earth's ancient past. Behind them came hundreds more of the same beasts, moving in perfect formation across the ice. "Is that really Hana?" asked his pilot, a young woman named Jiwoo. "That is either Hana or someone who has completely replaced her," Minho replied. "Because the diplomat I knew 3 months ago could barely survive a camping trip." The radio crackled to life. "Captain Minho, this is Hana. I am approaching your position with local allies. Do not be alarmed by their appearance. They are here to help." "Local allies?" Minho repeated. "Hana, those look like animals." "They are much more than animals, Captain. They are the original inhabitants of this world. And they have been waiting a very long time to take it back." As the herd approached the landing site, something amazing happened. The Korvath began to change, not physically, but in the way they moved and acted. The animal shuffle became a military march. The random trumpeting became organized calls. The simple herd became an army. Sergeant Jiwoo, who had served in a dozen battles, watched with growing amazement. "Captain, those creatures are moving in formation. They are using tactical positions. How is that possible?" Hana's voice came over the radio again, filled with quiet pride. "Because they remember, Sergeant. They remember everything." Above them, the Vorthak fleet moved into attack position. General Donghae had arrived and was preparing to crush the small human rescue force. He had no idea that the real threat was not in the sky, but on the ground below, hidden in the minds and hearts of creatures his people had dismissed as mere animals. The impossible bond between human and Korvath was about to become something even more impossible. It was about to become the weapon that would bring down an empire. General Donghae stood in the command center of his flagship and watched the small human rescue ships through the viewing screen. 3 tiny vessels against his fleet of 300 warships. It would not even be a fair fight. "Shall we destroy them now, General?" asked his weapons officer. "Not yet," Donghae replied, his scaled lips forming what passed for a smile among his people. "Let them see the size of our fleet first. Let them understand how hopeless their situation is. Fear makes victory sweeter." Below on the frozen surface, Commander Tyke received new orders from the general. The human rescue mission was to be captured alive if possible. The Vorthak High Council wanted to question them about human military capabilities before the final invasion of Earth. "Sir," reported one of Tyke's soldiers, "the human female has been spotted again. She is riding one of the local beasts toward the fortress." Tyke activated his viewing screen and saw exactly what his soldier described. The small human figure sat on the back of a massive Korvath, leading what appeared to be the largest herd anyone had ever seen. Hundreds of the creatures moved across the ice plain in a steady march toward his fortress. "How amusing," Tyke said. "The human thinks her animal friends will help her attack our fortress. She has finally gone completely insane." The Vorthak soldiers in the command center laughed at their commander's words. The idea of animals attacking their mighty fortress was beyond ridiculous. The fortress had stood for over a century. Its walls were built to withstand orbital bombardment. Its weapons could level mountains. What could a bunch of dumb beasts do against such power? They were about to find out. Hana felt the thoughts and emotions of every Korvath in the herd as they approached the fortress. 300 creatures moved, as one, their minds linked by memories that stretched back thousands of years. This was not just a herd anymore. This was an army that remembered how to fight. Through her connection with Bayek, she could sense other herds moving across the planet. Thousands more Korvath were converging on Vorthak positions everywhere. The signal had gone out through channels the aliens never knew existed. The sleeping giant of this world was finally waking up. "Captain Minho," she said into her radio. "Are your ships ready to record what happens next?" "Ready for what, Hana?" came the reply from high above. "What are you planning to do?" "I am planning to knock on their front door." The fortress of the Vorthak rose from the ice like a metal mountain. Its walls stretched 30 meters high and were covered with energy shields that shimmered blue in the cold air. Weapon towers dotted the structure, each one capable of destroying a city block. Guard posts lined the walls, filled with soldiers who watched the approaching herd with amusement. This fortress had never been conquered. The Vorthak had built it to be unbreakable. They had never imagined that their greatest enemy would come, not from the stars, but from the very ground they stood on. Hana guided Beck to the front of the herd as they reached the outer perimeter of the fortress. Here the Vorthak had built their first line of defense. Energy barriers stretched between metal posts, creating a wall of deadly force that would kill anything that touched it. The barriers were designed to stop ships and vehicles. They had never been tested against 300 angry Korvath. "Stop right there," came a voice from speakers built into the barrier posts. "You are entering restricted Vorthak territory. Turn back or face destruction." Hana did not slow down. Instead, she leaned forward and whispered something to Beck. The great creature trumpeted once, a sound that carried across the frozen plain like thunder. Every other Korvath answered with their own calls, creating a noise that shook the ground. The energy barriers flickered and died. The sound waves from 300 Korvath calling at once had overloaded the power systems. "Impossible," whispered a Vorthak technician in the fortress control room. "The barriers are designed to withstand any attack." "Fix them," commanded Tyke. "Fix them now." But there was no time. The herd was already charging. 300 Korvath in full charge was like a natural disaster. The ground shook under their feet. Their trumpeting calls filled the air with sound that could be heard for kilometers. Ice and snow flew from their massive bodies as they ran toward the fortress walls. The Vorthak soldiers on the walls stopped laughing. They raised their weapons and began to fire. Energy blasts lit up the sky as hundreds of rifles discharged at once. The shots hit the charging Korvath, but the creature's thick hides absorbed most of the damage. A few stumbled, but the rest kept coming. "Target the human," ordered a Vorthak officer. "Kill her and the beast will scatter." But Hana was not an easy target. She rode low on Bayek's neck, protected by the creature's massive head and tusks. Energy blasts passed over her and around her, but none found their mark. The first Korvath reached the fortress walls at full speed. The impact was tremendous. 30 meters of reinforced metal and concrete shook like paper in the wind. Cracks appeared in the massive structure. Then the second wave hit. And the third, the fortress walls, built to withstand orbital bombardment, began to crumble under the assault of creatures that had once built their own cities on this world. The Korvath remembered not just who they had been, but how their ancestors had built and destroyed. They knew exactly where to hit to bring down walls. "All units, fall back to secondary positions," Tyke ordered, his voice losing its calm confidence. "Seal the inner doors." But the inner doors were not built to stop what was coming. The Korvath poured through the breaks in the outer wall like a brown flood. Some headed for the weapon towers, using their tusks to tear apart the metal structures. Others charged toward the main building where the Vorthak command staff was trying to organize a defense. In the middle of it all, Hana rode Bayek toward the main courtyard of the fortress. Vorthak soldiers surrounded them, but they seemed afraid to fire. The sight of a small human commanding such massive creatures had shaken their understanding of the natural order. "Surrender now," called one of the officers, "and we will make your death quick." Hana looked down at the circle of soldiers pointing their weapons at her. Then she looked up at the Vorthak officers watching from the fortress walls. Finally, she looked directly at Commander Tyke, who stood on his command balcony with his mouth hanging open in shock. She smiled and leaned forward to whisper something in Bayek's ear. The great Korvath immediately dropped to his knees, lowering his massive head until it almost touched the ground. Around the courtyard, every other Korvath did the same thing. 300 enormous creatures knelt as one, their actions perfectly synchronized. The silence that followed was complete. No one moved. No one spoke. The Vorthak soldiers stared, in amazement at the display of perfect communication and trust between human and beast. In that moment of absolute quiet, Hana's voice carried clearly across the courtyard. "We are not here to surrender," she said. "We are here to take back what was stolen." The sound of her words seemed to break a spell. All around the fortress, alarms began to sound. But it was too late. The impossible had already happened. The fortress had fallen. The silence in the fortress courtyard stretched like a held breath. Commander Tyke stared down from his balcony at the impossible sight below. 300 massive creatures knelt in perfect formation around a single human woman. The display of coordination and trust went against everything the Vorthak believed about the natural order of the universe. "How?" Tyke whispered. His voice carried in the still air, reaching Hana's ears. She stood up on Beck's back, making herself visible to every Vorthak soldier in the courtyard. When she spoke, her voice was calm but filled with power that made the alien step back. "You never bothered to learn about this world," she said. "You saw creatures you thought were stupid animals. You never realized they were the people who lived here before you came." General Donghei's voice crackled over the fortress communication system from his ship high above. "Commander Tyke, what is your status? Why have your weapons stopped firing?" Tyke could not answer. He was still trying to understand what he was seeing. The human had somehow turned the native creatures into an army. But that was impossible. Humans were weak. They had no special abilities. They were only good for following orders and doing simple work. Hana seemed to read his thoughts. "You think we are weak because we do not conquer through fear. You think we are stupid because we try to make friends instead of slaves. But you forgot something important about humans." She paused and looked directly at Tyke. "We never give up and we never leave our friends behind." As if responding to her words, more sounds came from outside the fortress. The ground began to shake again, not from Korvath this time, but from something else. Vorthak soldiers ran to the walls and looked out across the frozen plain. What they saw made their cold blood run even colder. Thousands of Korvath were approaching from every direction. The creatures covered the landscape like a brown sea, all moving toward the fortress with the same organized purpose that had brought down the walls. But these were not just the local herds. These were Korvath from across the entire continent, all answering the same ancient call. "Impossible," breathed a Vorthak officer. "There are not that many of the beasts on the entire planet." "You are wrong," Hana said, her voice carrying clearly in the courtyard. "There are many more than you ever imagined. They have been hiding from you, waiting for the right moment. That moment is now." Through her connection with Bayek, Hana could feel the presence of every Korvath on the planet. The network of minds stretched across continents, linking creatures that the Vorthak had never bothered to count or catalog. There were not hundreds of them. There were tens of thousands, and they were all moving. General Donghei's voice came over, the communicators again, but now it carried a note of worry. "All Vorthak forces, we are detecting massive movement of native creatures across the planet. They appear to be converging on our military installations." Captain Minho's voice joined the conversation from his ship above. "General Donghei, this is Captain Minho of the Terran Rescue Fleet. I suggest you listen carefully to what our diplomat has to say." "I do not negotiate with inferior species," Donghei replied coldly. "Then you are about to lose this war," Minho said simply. In the courtyard, Hana climbed down from Beck's back and walked to the center of the circle of kneeling Korvath. The Vorthak soldiers raised their weapons, but something in her calm confidence made them hesitate to fire. "Commander Tyke," she called up to the balcony, "your empire is built on a lie. You tell yourselves that might makes right, that the strong should rule the weak. But true strength comes from something else." She placed her hand on Beck's massive head. The great creature made a soft sound of contentment, a sound that was echoed by every other Korvath in the courtyard. True strength comes from trust, from friendship, from the willingness to protect those who cannot protect themselves. As she spoke, reports began flowing in from across the planet. Vorthak bases were under attack everywhere, not from human ships or advanced weapons, but from the creatures the aliens had dismissed as harmless animals. The Korvath were taking back their world. The humans taught them to fight, reported one panicked Vorthak officer. They are using human tactics, but Hana shook her head. I did not teach them anything. They already knew how to fight. They just needed someone to remind them that it was worth fighting for. Commander Tayek finally found his voice. What do you want? I want you to leave this world, Hana said simply. Take your ships and your soldiers and go back to your own space. This planet belongs to its original people. We will never surrender to animals, Tayek snarled. Then you will surrender to me. The words came not from Hana but from Beck. The great Korvath had spoken in perfect Vorthak, his voice deep and clear. Around the courtyard, other Korvath began to speak as well, their words mixing human and Vorthak languages in ways that made the alien soldiers' eyes widen in shock. We remember our words, Beck continued, looking directly at Commander Tayek. We remember our cities. We remember when your people came and made our world cold and dead. We remember everything. The transformation was stunning to watch. As the Korvath spoke, they seemed to change before everyone's eyes. Their posture became more upright. Their movements became more purposeful. They were no longer pretending to be simple animals. They were reclaiming their heritage as the intelligent beings they had always been. General Donghei's voice came over the communicators one final time, but now it was filled with defeat. All Vorthak forces, begin immediate evacuation of Vorthak. Prime. We are withdrawing from this system. A wise choice, Captain Minho replied. And General, when you report back to your High Council, tell them this. Humanity does not conquer worlds. We liberate them. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy watched in amazement as the news spread. The mighty Vorthak Empire, which had seemed unstoppable, had been defeated not by superior technology or massive fleets, but by the simple power of friendship between species. Hana chose to remain on the world that was now called Korvath Prime, its original name restored. She worked with Beck and the other Korvath to rebuild their civilization, combining their ancient wisdom with human knowledge to create something new and wonderful. The planet began to warm as the Korvath used their deep understanding of their world to reverse the damage done by Vorthak terraforming. Green plants appeared in sheltered valleys. Rivers began to flow again. The world was slowly returning to life, but the most important change was not on Korvath Prime. It was throughout the galaxy, where other species began to look at humanity with new respect. The humans had shown that there was another way to solve conflicts, another path to strength that did not require conquest or domination. Other human diplomats, inspired by Hana's example, began forming similar bonds with oppressed species throughout Vorthak space. The Empire's foundation of fear began to crumble as their subjects found new allies among the stars. On a warm evening, as the first sunset in 1,000 years painted the sky orange and gold, Hana sat beside Beck on a hill overlooking the growing city below. Human and Korvath engineers worked side by side, building homes that combined the best of both their architectural traditions. Thank you, Beck said in his deep, gentle voice. For what? Hana asked. For seeing us as more than animals, for believing we could be people again. Hana smiled and leaned against her friend's warm side. Thank you for teaching me that the strongest bonds are built not on power, but on understanding. Far above them, human and Korvath ships patrolled, the system together protecting the peace they had built. And across the galaxy, the word spread that humanity had found something more valuable than any weapon or technology. They had found the secret of making friends with anyone, anywhere, no matter how different they might seem. It was a power that would change the stars themselves.